All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Transportation Committee for the Sacramento Area Council of Governments. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Madam Clerk, could you go ahead and please take care of some housekeeping items?
Yes, absolutely. Good morning. Just a few housekeeping reminders before we get started. This meeting is being recorded and will be available to view on Sacog's website after the meeting. For any members of the public tuning in today and who wish to make a comment, you can notify us by selecting raise hand or by pressing *9 if calling in by phone. All public comment will be limited to 3 minutes each. And to help with timing, I will give the speaker a 1-minute warning. Lastly, this is for our committee members. Please remember to mute yourselves until you're ready to speak, as this will help eliminate any background noise. And when you are ready to speak, please use the raise hand feature or press *9 if phoning in to alert the chair.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, if we're going to go to the Pledge of Allegiance right now, Director Desmond, would you mind leading us in the pledge?
I'd be honored.
All right, thank you.
Please stand and join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you very much. Madam Clerk, can we go ahead and do the roll call?
Yes, please prepare to indicate whether you're present when I call your name. Director Bradford?
Here.
Thank you. Director Branscombe? Absent. Desmond?
Here.
Ledesma for Guerrero?
Here.
Thank you. Jennings?
I'm here.
Thank you. Joyner?
Here.
Saylor? Absent. Chenier? Absent. Vice Chair Sander?
Here.
Thank you. Vice Chair Spokley?
Here.
Chair Soon?
Here.
And ex officio member Tacker for Bennett Paul?
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Great, thank you very much. Now we'll go to any public communications for items that are not on the agenda. Jessica, do we have anyone in the would like to speak? Any items not on the agenda?
We don't have any public comment.
Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and move to our consent calendar. We have a consent calendar here. Does anyone have any questions about the consent calendar? Seeing none, are there any folks in the public who want to speak on the consent calendar? Madam Clerk?
Chair Soon, no one is raising their hand. No public comment.
Okay. With that, I'll bring it back to the committee and entertain any motions at this time.
Mr. Chair, I move approval of the consent calendar.
Second.
Motion from Vice Chair Spokley, and I heard a second from, I think it was Director Bradford.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Can we do a roll call vote, please?
Yes, absolutely. Director Bradford?
Aye.
Thank you. Branscombe? Absent. Desmond?
Aye.
Ledesma for Guerrero?
Aye.
Jennings?
Aye.
Joyner?
Yes.
Saylor? Absent. Chenier? Absent. Vice Chair Sander?
Aye.
Vice Chair Spokley?
Yes.
Chair Soon?
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, thank you very much. We'll move on to our action items. Item 4, I have approving Federal Transit Administration Section 5310, our Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act. Ms. Von Bechtold, how are you doing? Good morning.
I'm doing well. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep, thank you.
Okay, great. So this past December, I'll go with CRISA, the shortened version of the second stimulus was signed into law. This included $50 million nationally for the Federal Transit Administration Section 5310 program. And of that amount, the Sacramento urbanized area was apportioned just over $273,000. The FTA Section 5310 program provides transportation funds, usually on a competitive basis, for the purchase of equipment or services to transport or improve access to transportation for seniors and people with disabilities. Sacog has a memoranda of understanding with Caltrans that gives Sacog the responsibility for approval of award amounts in the region, in the Sacramento urbanized area. Sacog has to approve the allocation for the FTA 5310 CRISA funds for the urbanized area for them to be included in the grant that will be submitted by Caltrans to the Federal Transit Administration. The Caltrans chose to go with a different route to distribute the funds in order to expedite the disbursement of them in the most efficient and equitable manner. Instead of doing this as a discretionary process, they chose to go and ask the current recipients of FTA 5310 funds that were most recently approved in August of 2020 by the Federal Transit Administration, and ask them if they wanted to opt in to receive additional monies from the CRISA stimulus. And 4 of our 6 current FTA 5310 recipients opted in. Based on the funding available, Caltrans chose to distribute the funds equally by simply dividing the amount of funding available by 4 and giving each agency $68,000 in operating assistance agreement with Caltrans to reimburse them for operating expenses. They can backdate these costs to the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic to January 20th, 2020. All CRISA transit funding is being provided at 100% federal share with no local match required, as it normally would be, and is available for expenses generally eligible under FTA funding programs to prevent, prepare for, and respond to COVID-19. So we'd like to ask that the Transportation Committee recommend that the board approve the 4 CRISA FTA Section 5310 awards, which are shown in Attachment A, certify that all 4 awardees meet the Section 5310 requirements and conditions and have been reviewed in the region's public participation process, which is Attachment B, and then certify by resolution in Attachment C that the recommended awards in the Sacramento urbanized area are consistent with Sacog's adopted Metropolitan Transportation Plan Sustainable Community Strategy. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Barbara. Are there any questions from our committee members for Barbara? Not seeing anyone in the chat hands either. Jessica, can we go ahead and ask the public if there's any questions?
There's no comment from the public.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll bring it back to the committee for motion at this time.
Joyner moves approval of the item.
Okay.
Jennings, second.
All right, motion by Dr. Joyner, seconding by Vice Chair. I think you're Vice Chair Jennings, right? I'm missing out here. Yes, Dr. Jennings.
Yes,
Vote.
that's what I got.
Yeah.
Okay, Director Bradford,
Aye.
Director Branscombe, absent. Desmond,
Aye.
Ledesma for Guerrero,
Aye.
Jennings,
Aye.
Joyner,
Aye.
Saylor, absent. Chenier,
Aye.
thank you. Vice Chair Sander,
Aye.
Vice Chair Spokley,
Yes.
Chair Soon,
Aye.
motion carries.
Okay. Thank you very much. And then let's go on to the next item, having item number 5. I've got too many windows here. Approving the federal fiscal year 2021 regional program of projects for the Federal Transit Administration, section 5311 CRRSAA funds. Ms. Van Bechtold, you're up again.
All right, it is me again. I'll give a little less background this time since we talked about the CRISA funds in the last item. So Sacog staff, in coordination with our 3 eligible rural public transit operators in the 4-county Sacog Regional Transportation Planning Agency area, we prepared a federal fiscal year 2021 regional program of projects recommended for Federal Transit Administration 5311 CRISA funds. It's rural transit funding. In our area, the FTA 5311 CRISA funds are providing just over $2.22 million in funding to our region's rural transit agencies to help them respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. And you can see the program of projects there as the attachment to this item. So we'd like to ask the Transportation Committee recommend to the board to approve by resolution the federal fiscal year 2021 FTA section 5311 CRISA program of projects. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Thank you again, Barbara. Any questions for Barbara on this item? Seeing none, I'm going to ask Jessica, are any comments from the public that you can see? I don't see any either.
No public comment.
Okay, bring it back to the committee for action. Is there a motion on this action?
Director Bradford will move for approval.
Okay, I
Oakley
heard
seconds.
motion from Director Bradford and a second from Vice Chair Spokley. Roll call vote, please.
Director Bradford,
Aye.
Branscombe, absent. Desmond,
Aye.
Ledesma for Guerrero,
Aye.
Jennings,
Aye.
Joyner,
Yes.
Saylor,
Yes.
Chenier,
Aye.
Vice Chair Sander,
Aye.
Vice Chair Spokley,
Yes.
Chair Soon.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you very much. And then let's go on to the next item, item 6. Our 2021 Sacog funding round staff recommendations. Garrett, good morning.
Well, good morning, Chair Soon and members of the committee. The item before you for your consideration is the staff recommendations in the 4-county Sacog 2021 funding round. Before we go into the staff recommendation, of which there's 3 parts, I did want to spend a little bit of time stepping back and give a recap. And indeed, for some of the newer board members, maybe getting caught up to speed on the steps that led to this staff recommendation for your consideration this morning. And the tagline really is, this is the culmination of 2 years worth of work. You may recall in 2020, staff spent a considerable amount of time working with stakeholders throughout the region, seeking input on the Sacog funding round, especially around themes of investment priorities, the application evaluation process. Likewise, this committee, the Transportation Committee, and the full board last year spent multiple months deliberating the Sacog 2020 funding round. And ultimately, the board acted in the fall in September on what we call the funding round framework for this upcoming 2021 funding round. And that framework set the objectives and the goals that the board endorsed. It set the criteria and also set the programs of the round. And based on all of this sort of heavy engagement and feedback, that framework made notable changes to this 2020 round compared to the last prior cycles. In particular, there were some structural changes in terms of the programs. So you'll be hearing in what follows the maintenance and modernization category, the transformative category, both new categories that came out of the board's new framework. A large theme that the board sort of thought very critically about in your deliberation was how to move forward with a competitive round, a competitive transportation funding round that also recognized the need for certainty. And so you'll hear in this new framework the ideas about larger awards that could span multiple cycles, really important new additions such as project sponsors in Sacog, staff meeting before the application period to talk through projects, and for sponsors to bring forward as part of their application their own priority rankings. We move forward as well in this framework with some themes we've been continuing from prior cycles in terms of program consolidation, simplification, where we can, application streamlining, and then in the evaluation side of things, a broader sort of membership on the working groups, a new interview stage, and then continue to bring in more data, what we call the project performance assessment tool. The final part of that framework that the board adopted in fall established the core programs of the round. The 2 largest are the regional and community design program, and those are the subject of the staff item. We're taking them together as one recommendation. I want to thank my colleague, Greg Chu, who was the lead of the community design program. It's its 9th cycle. Greg's been the head of community design for all 9 of those. We're really excited about the projects that are moving forward for recommendation out of community design. As is our practice, we're taking both the regional and community design program together for your consideration. Before I jump into the substance of the staff recommendation, just maybe to close out this top level look of the new framework the board endorsed. The staff recommendation for your consideration this morning Within that maintenance and modernization category, 19 of the 20 top priority projects recommended by sponsors are recommended for funding in the staff recommendation. The transformative category, the other large category of the regional program, more competitive but similar finding, 10 of the top 13 priority projects, number one priority projects from sponsors are recommended for funding. So weighing that in sort of the consideration, as well as the board's objectives and the framework of preserving the ability to meet regional, state, and federal performance objectives. So for example, the other goals in that framework are positioning the region for state and federal discretionary funds and meeting those performance objectives. So this is how the framework comes together in a competitive round. So let me turn, and I should say that the intent of the presentation is to be brief, because I know though we want to leave plenty of time for deliberation and public comment. The first part of the staff recommendation relates to the budget. In October of last year, after you adopted the framework, the board adopted the budget for the 2021 funding round. That budget did anticipate the future possible revenues, especially on the federal side. So you just heard Barbara speak about CRISA. I'm glad, Chair Soon, you gave the full acronym, because I always get messed up on the R's of it. What is it, recovery or relief? But the CRISA funds. So this committee just took action on 2 elements of those CRISA funds relating to transit. There's a third part of the CRISA that Congress enacted in December that made available $10 billion nationally for transportation funding, this one-time transportation funding. Of that, about $900 million came to the state of California. The California Transportation Commission has recently acted on the appropriation of that funds. And so staff anticipates about $16.5 million of these one-time stimulus funds will come to the 4-county region. So the staff recommendation is to bring these CRISA funds into the 2021 funding round budget, continue the practice of programming up to 5% of those funds for fund management and technical assistance. So if the board were to move forward with this action, it would increase the funding round budget for these programs from $182 million to $198 million. That's the first part of the recommendation, is to bring the CRISA funds in to the budget. The second part of the staff recommendation is then for this committee to recommend the board approve the awards of that $198 million in available funding. I want to talk a little bit briefly about the process that went into the staff recommendation. First off, we received over 110 applications in these programs, the most ever in these programs. It was incredibly evident the amount of time and effort that went into those applications. We're very grateful and recognize the time the sponsors put in. We likewise, when we convened the evaluation, spent a considerable amount of time looking through 110 applications that requested over $460 million for less than $200 million available. As I mentioned earlier, new to this cycle, we formalized the process where before applications were due, we sat down with every interested project sponsor for that pre-application consultation. We found that to be a highly value-added step of the process. We then convened subject-specific working groups. The framework that the board adopted set forward the evaluation criteria. We convened 5 separate working groups to really be laser focused on elements of that criteria. Those working groups consisted of both Sacog and outside Sacog staff, as we have in prior cycles. New to this cycle, the board's new framework is, and those working groups also considered project sponsors. Every working group member also had to sign a conflict of interest form, so no working group member reviewed any projects that they had a conflict on. There were different sort of criteria within the working groups, but a common theme is sort of the pairing of data and sort of the narrative-based elements of the application for the working groups to make their recommendation. So it was based both in quantitative and qualitative. Those various working groups became the input that were compiled to form the basis of the staff recommendation. So again, that's another huge thanks for the working group members, the volunteer working group members who collectively went through 110 applications across multiple evaluation criteria. Attachment C does give the summary of the working group's reviews. So then the third and final part of the staff recommendation would be the standard language that we use in the funding round is if the committee were to recommend and the board were to adopt this action, it would allow the Sacog executive director to execute any memorandum of understanding and then begin the important work of actually getting these projects into our delivery program. So in short, again, plenty of attachments with more detail. Both myself, Matt Carpenter, and Greg Chu are on here to answer any questions we have. We see this really as the culmination of 2 years of work, right? The board's engagement in building a new framework and then this final step in executing on the framework. So that is the staff recommendation for this committee's consideration, and we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Garrett. I have a question, but I want to go to the committee members first. Any other questions from the committee members? Okay, seeing none at this time. I just wanted to ask about, first of all, want to commend you all for your efforts, because that is an incredible amount of work to go through. Obviously, not enough money is always to go around. I hope Vice Chair Sander, your work with League of Cities is more fruitful in the federal transportation infrastructure plans, so we can get more of this transportation funding allocated here. My question in regards to the committee, Garrett, is one, how were the committee working groups established? And two, in terms of allocations, as you analyzed projects, was there consideration on equity to areas for each of the jurisdictions, or was it solely on the metrics of greenhouse gas reductions and et cetera, et cetera?
Oh yeah, thank you, Chair Soon. So for the first part, I referenced 5 different working groups. We have the practice of convening those working groups of subject matter experts. So I think an important point to emphasize is within these programs, they are, sometimes we use the term flexible funding round, in that the types of projects we receive, right, they range from a transit rehabilitation project, a bike project, a road capacity project, a technology project, an operations project. So the first criteria is making sure we have the breadth of subject matter experts to be able to, evaluate that breadth of projects. The second is, pairing, those experts. We want to make sure that the region is well represented on those working groups. It's definitely, we want to make sure sort of rural, suburban, and urban, so your inputs are heard. And then finally, it's, this is the first time that we've moved forward with having project sponsors on that working group. It's balancing that with, we have a strong tradition of inviting expert additional analysts. So for example, in the past, we've had agencies such as GSEC, such as our partners in Placer or El Dorado, right, who are also subject matter experts. So it's trying to find that right balance across it. I should emphasize too, right, it's looking for that criteria within the working group. So the working group looking at VMT or multimodal, right, the expert within that, it's a very different type than when we have the engineers group who's laser focused on delivery and evaluation. So that is the process. There is also just a recognition of, for a working group to be effective, it can't have, endless number of people. We had a lot of projects to get through. And so traditionally we found a working group, this is not, a magic number, but about 7 or 8 is the most effective in terms of the ability to have everyone contribute, everyone be heard, and get through the number of projects. So that's the first part of your question. The second part is the criteria put forward from the board, right, lays out how projects will be evaluated. New to this cycle is the consideration of agency priority. So within the maintenance and modernization category, that is part of the evaluation criteria. And so that is paired with the other evaluation criteria, such as performance outcomes or deliverability, to inform the staff recommendation.
Great, thank you. Director Chenier, you had a question?
Sorry, kind of a comment and a question. So first of all, I want to thank staff. I mean, a tremendous amount of work, and a little bit of context on this. This is probably one of the more controversial issues that we've dealt with, at least since I've been on the board. And we really spent a lot of time trying to meet the needs of everyone and get a better understanding of process, and then also how we can make sure that people get their priorities. And that really involved putting a little bit more responsibility back onto the municipalities to let us as Sacog know what the priorities were or are. And I'm excited that 19 out of 20 out of 20 would have been great, but 19 out of 20 of the jurisdictions hit their priorities. I think that's a really important point. One of the other, or involved with that, was a lot of the consultation at the front end of the process. And we put a lot of emphasis into that to make sure that all the municipalities got their messages across and help them with their own priorities. So I don't know if it's Garrett or Matt or James on this one. Could you talk a little bit about how that process worked? And then where I wanted to go to is, how are we, since this was the first time we used this process overall, how are we looking at a debrief on it? And I know this is a little bit too soon, but to see how, if and how it should be improved for the next funding round. I think that's really important. So consultation, how that all went, did everyone take advantage of that? And then how do we look forward on this?
Great, I'll start, and then, or James, you want to go ahead?
No, go ahead, Garrett. Take the first one.
Yeah, for the consultation is a great question. We reached out to every project sponsor. The high majority of sponsors did take us up. It wasn't required, but they did take us up on the pre-application consultation. There were a few that did not. It is the first time we did it, this pre-application consultation. We found it highly effective. I think a point to emphasize is our colleagues at Sacog spend a lot of time on the analytical side, where the sponsors would identify the projects they were thinking about. We would then run those through what we call the project performance assessment tool, which gives some sort of data inputs. And again, it's not the end all be all. And then we would ask the sponsors to come forward with some of their own data analysis. So when we'd have that pre-application consultation, it was grounded in the specifics of the project, because if you're having a conversation just at a top level about projects, it's hard to then sort of connect the dots about what are the performance outcomes that the board has endorsed for this program. So we found it highly effective. It was time consuming. It was button up against the holiday season, and so it was a lot of work. Sponsors put a lot of work into it. We also had to, that was 25 or so sponsor meetings that we had buttoned up against the holidays. So big thanks to my colleagues on getting through that. So not to say it's we had it all figured out, but we do feel it's an effective sort of first iteration of that process.
Director Chenier, if I could take your second question on the debrief. I mean, again, we'd love to hear this morning from committee members, directors, as we will through the other committees as we go through this afternoon and Monday. I think the sooner the better on a debrief, depending on the pleasure of the committee this morning while it is fresh. I would suggest the Strategic Planning Committee of the board only meets 3 times a year. This is a great one for them to take on, and that's coming up in May. But if, again, pleasure of the board to debrief on this, I would say, and I'm curious of other comments and insights here. A lot of what we talked about, and Director Chenier, you hit on this, through the discussion last year, through a lot of intense conversations with our jurisdictions, our partners, our transit partners, I think really played out in how we're seeing these recommendations. In other words, that ranking was, I think, critical. The pre-consultation was critical. Chair Soon, to your point, I think you were asking about geographic equity in your question. And this was a big topic of conversation last year, right? Which is, it's as old as politics itself. Am I getting my fair share? And as always, it depends on what you mean and how you run the numbers, but what the criteria is. And I would continue to this day to urge this committee and our region to not use a population-based number for transportation. The ranking is the way in which, as we said many times last year, we are trying to provide cities and counties and sponsors, transit agencies, air districts, TMAs, certainty without saying we can guarantee you dollars and cents. Because at the minute we guarantee you dollars and cents through an Excel spreadsheet based on whatever criteria you come up with, I think is the day we lose our competitive advantage in this region. So I'm not saying I think there's important lessons learned and things we can improve upon and change, but just a through line from last year to this year, so far anyway, I think we've seen a lot of improvements and more transparency and certainty.
And
thanks, James.
One more question, if I could. Do you think that the process improved the overall, not integrity of the applications, but the level of application that we got? Was that an improvement because of this process and the pre-consultation period?
I'll let Garrett or Matt handle that.
I think generally, yes, Director Chenier, we did see real evidence of those early consultations helping many sponsors kind of focus on, say, the performance outcome that would probably they're best suited for their project, and then it strengthened their case that they made. We found that consultation was particularly important this time around because we streamlined, the applications in terms of making them shorter, and because of that, it made all the more value from that early consultation where we help people focus on the right performance outcomes that might help strengthen the case, and then suggest maybe some supplementary material that they might be able to include in their application to also make their case clear. So we saw some really good examples of that, and I think that this is that back and forth engagement that started early, was very helpful for also sponsors trying to determine what they really cared the most about funding. So part of the reason you saw 19 of the 20 priorities being able to be funded was that it really helped, I think, many sponsors go back to their capital improvement programs or go to their maintenance programs and kind of align where they had funding gaps with this opportunity from Sacog. So we really found that to be a good exchange, and we sure hope that we can build upon that in any funding rounds that follow.
Great. And so just as a last point, Director Soon or Chair Soon, if we could provide some direction to staff to do outreach back to everyone on their comments on the process, I think that would be great. And if we want to take it to whatever committee you all think is the right one, it's fine with me. And with that, I'd like to move the staff recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Director Chenier. We'll hold that motion, table that motion for a second, because I know there's a couple of hands raised. I want to quickly concur, with I think what Matt was saying. I mean, I think it was very helpful to have each jurisdiction prioritize their own needs, and then obviously the pre-application process. And then I just also wanted to touch upon what James mentioned. I mean, James, you've always been an advocate about, the regionalism, of course, but just trying not to get to dollars and cents. And I think bringing it back to the full board, explaining, and we talked about this too in 2020, that we committed to report out on how things were, ended up, and giving some rationale for that. And so I think it would be very appropriate and appreciated by the board members and everyone involved to hear that explanation, and to just further the conversation in trying to improve this process, and then ensure a greater understanding of why we're doing it in such a way, and perhaps why geographical equity sometimes may need to be compromised to achieve the greater good. That's at least a conversation that we need to continue having. Vice Chair Sandra, I know you've had your hand up for a while.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, geographical equity is a really interesting question, in part because it's darn hard to measure. If you could imagine a central interchange in some location that affects all of the outlying regions with regard to how traffic can get to you, or your folks can get to jobs, or people can get to your jobs, whatever it may be. How do you score that exactly if it's not your interchange? That's a tough bit of math, quite frankly, trying to figure out exactly numerically what that connection ought to be. But I raised my hand to speak on a slightly different issue. And that's this prioritization that we did this year, or actually asking applicants to choose a couple of areas by which to compete, in essence. So do we have any sort of feedback from staff at this point about how well that worked? The concern I would have about it, sort of going into it or now looking at it, is that what if just by accident someone chose the wrong metric? Right. So for example, there's a freight metric and there's an economic development metric. What if you picked one thinking you don't want to pick both, but maybe you picked the wrong one? There's a little bit of question in my mind there about how we're scoring things if we're relying on applicants to choose exactly where they're going to compete. You understand my concern?
I'll start, and I think part of it is that in that pre-application consultation, that was a conversation we had with sponsors. We do, recognize our tradition has been, this is the term I used was flexible funding round. There is a great policy advantage for the ability for different types of projects to come forward. And so we have 7 performance outcomes in the past. that we asked the sponsor to actually speak to 3 of those performance outcomes based on the board's deliberation in the fall. We reduced that to 2 so they could be laser focused on those performance outcomes. So we do understand that, it's part of it is, this working with us and thinking through it. Part of it is, the sponsor though also looking through its own, project and trying to come forward with its most competitive case. So in a heavily competitive oversubscribed program, right, there is the need to have criteria that looks at, the projects that do advance multiple objectives. And so, I think the point's well taken. I do think the pre-application consultation is a step in the right direction. But at the end of the day, it's also balancing that with, a lot of these projects, especially the larger ones that are also going to be moving forward to compete in other programs, right? The best it can sort of crystallize its performance case, all the better. And so it's partly on the pre-application consultation, but it's also partly on, the sponsor, feeling confident with the performance outcomes that they're moving forward with.
I'm just imagining, community A, community B, they could both compete on either freight or economic development. Each chose a different one. And then it turns out the one that chose economic development actually would have done better had they chose freight. And just at the outset, trying to figure out, oh my goodness, which one should it be? And it doesn't have to be those 2. Could be any of our criteria, right? Do you go for safety or do you go for something else, right? Because you don't know, how am I going to rank at safety? Hard to tell versus something else. So do you think those were adequately covered? Do you think the applicants had a good feeling for that in the pre-application meeting?
Yeah, well, of course, let the sponsors speak for themselves. It is something we tried to communicate and discuss in each pre-application consultation. That was part of the advantage of the ability to get one layer deeper into these projects, not just say here's a project, here's its title, right? But the ability to look at some preliminary data, to look at the sponsor's own provided data. That was one of the primary charges of the pre-application consultation.
And I might just add, Director Sander, I mean, it's a good point, and it's one we're really aware of. It's on the list of issues that we hope to discuss actively with sponsors when we do the debrief, right? To talk about what's ahead. And as part of that looking ahead will be also looking at those indicators or those performance indicators, whether it's related to jobs rate or what it happens to other economic benefit outcomes, to see what indicators might be changed so that we also make sure this evolves in terms of the tools we use to measure economic benefit, freight, and all the other outcomes. So we do hope to have good input from sponsors that will ultimately lead to some Sacog work to get prepared for the next iteration of the funding round. But it's that interesting tension, right, between streamlining a process to go from 3 to 2 outcomes you speak to, at the same time making sure that we do everything we can to support sponsors, making a compelling case in a shorter application. So that's the commitment, to kind of make sure we debrief that, because those indicators behind those 2 outcomes you focused on are going to be among the things we discuss with your staff and others that are stakeholder agencies that have some fresh ideas about what worked and what they think still needs improvement in the future.
And last, short question, there's a split here between transit and other. How do we determine where that split is in terms of dollars? Just review for us, was that done at the outset, or do we just see it as a result of the process?
Vice Chair Sander, could you clarify? I think I'm not sure.
So dollars were awarded to transit in this process. How do we determine what the split is?
We didn't have an explicit modal split, Director Sander. In terms of it did turn out that we've got a healthy amount of projects that are either expressly transit or expressly for improving our roads. A lot of complete streets, as you see, the rehab coupled with modernization improvements that kind of make it a better environment for multimodal travel. So those were good outcomes, right? To see that we were pretty balanced. We had good multimodal investment. That the guidelines didn't have any explicit targets by mode, though. It's a good outcome that we do see good investment across the board for different travel modes.
So there was no requirement, no goal. It's just competition outcome.
Yeah, and Vice Chair Sander, if I could, because I think this is another important learning from this cycle, at least from my sort of 30,000 foot vantage point. And I know the board knows this, but we are while we're about to get to the ATP, active transportation item next, right? But we are
for some time have been trying to move away from thinking about, roads, transit, sidewalks, the modes, right, into networks and outcomes and performance. And the two main, let's set community design aside for a second, but the two main categories of maintenance, I'll shorten it to, right, and transformative. It makes all the sense in the world to me, and especially where things going at the state level and the federal level in terms of policy, that transit and cities and counties compete on the maintenance side, right? And it turns out in the staff recommendation, RT got an award, a significant award on the maintenance side because of this of the capital infrastructure. And that's the right way, I believe, to do that, is to look at pavement condition, transit condition is the way the federal performance measures are going. So they compete in that maintenance category. And in this round, certainly RT, I think, has made a very strong case that those light rail cars are beyond their useful life. And then in the transformative category, they're also competing across modes, right? So there was no target. But those were those two categories. Again, from my vantage point, more to come in terms of debrief and lessons learned. I think those are the right categories. And those are the right categories to actually be sort of multimodal, but to think in those terms. And that's a very good policy discussion for the board going forward, I think, which is the age-old fix it first, right, question versus the newer transformative stuff across all modes. Because that is a tension that we're going to a region with limited dollars.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Carr.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Sue Tacker from Caltrans. I want to thank Sacog for again partnering with Caltrans on many things that we're working on. Most recently on the Sacog, the recommendation for funding for our managed lane projects. Really appreciate Matt Carpenter and Garrett working with us prior to the recommendations, during the recommendations, even afterwards, answering my questions. Great partnership on all fronts, and I'm very grateful for that. The recommendation for award that we have in front of us for our managed lane projects will get us to PA&ED for all three managed lanes projects, which is a great feat. For Cap City, for I-80 and I-5, we'll be able to finish PA&ED by mid-2022. We will be able to start PS&E for Cap City, and we'll be able to continue working on Cap City until December of 2022. Unfortunately, the award that we received will limit our working on I-5 and I-80 after June of 2022. So we are looking for funding sources. We've been working with the Sacog staff on the infra application. Thanks again to James and to Matt and Barbara, working really late on Friday night to submit the infra application for us as a sponsor. That was a huge, huge undertaking. Again, it's a great partnership that we have in collaboration, but those funds are for construction only. It's very important for us to get all three projects ready for construction so we can continue to apply for funds like infra, for the build NOFO that's coming out toward the end of April, also for SB1. There's priority given to construction ready projects. And for us to get these managed lanes projects to the place where we can compete well for these federal funds, we need the support from Sacog and from the working committee to be able to get to that point. So just wanted to let the team know that we are appreciative. We'll be able to continue working on all three projects. I-80 and I-5 will have to be until May of 2022, June of 2022. But Cap City, we should be able to continue working on until December of 2022 with the current award. So it is my hope that we get an infusion of capital coming in if there's a discretionary cycle next year, or if the recommendation could be reconsidered, so we are able to continue working on these great projects that are part of the MTP SES. We are on a mission to work on managed lanes, and we appreciate any feedback or any support that you can provide on that matter. So thank you so much for the opportunity to comment this morning.
Thank you, Ms. Tacker. We greatly appreciate our partnership with Caltrans and all the great work you're doing out there. We see it every day. I want to go, let's see, is there, okay, Director Desmond, do you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Chair Soon. And I just want to just say thank you to James and Garrett for spending some time with me as a new guy here trying to understand all of this. It sounds like the process that you put in place for this funding round is certainly improvement, certainly increase, or certainly appreciate the level of engagement with the sponsoring municipalities. And I look forward to debriefing with my own Sacramento County Department of Transportation, but also debriefing with you as well about the process and how it went this time around. And when we're ready, I would gladly second Director Chenier's motion for approval.
Okay, thank you, Director Desmond. Director Saylor.
Thanks, Darren. My comment is about project applications that were not successful in this round. I appreciate the commentary in the scoring sheets to just let us know what some of the issues were, and I'm wondering what the process will be in the time to come for jurisdictions to be able to hone in and improve the competitiveness of those applications that did not receive scores sufficient to qualify for funding this time.
I'll start first. I think, likely one theme that might come out of the board's debrief is, and it's not, we do this already, but the need to continue the communication, the engagement. So it's not just a pre-application consultation a month before the next funding round. We of course, are in close communication with project sponsors, but I think, I would imagine that when the board is thinking about the next funding cycle, right, there seems to be some momentum around this idea of the pre-application consultation, right? The ability to expand that out, right? To not have it be of course there could be the defined phase, but the ability to continue to communicate with sponsors. We do offer every round, a feedback session about this sort of the attachment C, which is the write-up, the ability to kind of go point by point. We are surprised that we are seldom taken up on that. We very much recognize that it's on to the next thing, that these very, very busy with other things. And so we're always available to talk through. We're more than happy to point out some of the more critical points that some of the various working groups raised. And I think we're also 100% committed to make sure that we have that conversation that builds towards then, that final pre-application consultation. So it's not just that one meeting where all these issues are sort of, last time we talked about this was 2 years ago.
Okay.
Makes sense.
May just add, Director Saylor, that there's a number of opportunities just looming, right? There's the potential of another bit of federal stimulus funding or an infrastructure plan they're talking about, as well as the next funding round. So time is of the essence to make sure some of our sponsors that had good ideas and perhaps some strengths in their application, we do our best to try to offer data, maps, tools, and thoughts to them that they might be able to pursue some of the new federal opportunities we're seeing, as well as the next round of Senate Bill 1 or SB 1 competitive grants is just around the corner. Those could be, the call for projects may happen as soon as the end of fall of 2021. So we've been reminding sponsors that there's a lot of state and federal opportunities ahead, and then the next Sacog funding round will probably be, within the next 2 years, if not sooner.
Director Saylor, if I could just respond to that, I want to just emphasize we are our doors are open to all project sponsors for debriefs. I know some folks have already started to take us up on those, and also just for the board, I from my vantage point now, 4 years into Sacog, 2 major funding rounds and a mini one in between there. We've seen projects. I know board members have seen this too, that were not successful, did not prevail 2 years ago, that worked with us, that took up the opportunity for a debrief to sharpen pencils, to go back to the drawing board, and are now successful in this staff recommendation. And I think that's really important. And what I've seen is, and I've talked to a number of you about this, I've actually seen, and to Vice Chair Sanders' point about which do you choose, right? Is it safety? Is it congestion? Is it economic prosperity, development? We want to work with our project sponsors to sharpen those arguments, because those arguments are going to be more important than ever. And we have seen project sponsors, cities, counties, and transit districts, I believe, really help with our data, with our PPA performance tool, begin to really make a much stronger case, which is what, as I said, we're gonna have to make if we're gonna be competitive at the state level and the federal level. It's certainly our hope there will be more opportunities to be competitive at the federal level. And if I might, Chair Soon, just I wanted to respond to Director Tacker's comments. We really appreciate the importance of those three projects. If you, all of you, think about, and I've had a number of people ask me too, very, very genuine questions. Why is Caltrans in the mix on a regional, local transit district funding round, right? And the answer is because these are federal and state transportation dollars. And several decades ago, the state of California decided to really kind of loosen the strings and the reins on this, so that metropolitan regions and agencies such as ours could really take more hold of where are the problems we're trying to solve, not just simply on a facility owned by one jurisdiction, but across all facilities. But Caltrans is a critical partner in all of this. And I think you heard Director Tacker mention, that there is funding that we're recommending here that will get through certain design and environmental phases. They certainly asked for a lot more. But we're often trying to figure out how do we help projects move along. Those are massive projects. And so this is, again, I'm flagging this really as one of the tensions, one of the many tensions. This is not taking local money and putting them on state projects. This is taking transportation dollars and putting them where we think we have the best performance. But those are important projects. Yolo Causeway, I-5 to the airport, Cap City. You couldn't actually think about three more vital choke points in the region. We don't have enough money in the regional pot to solve all of those. And the question always is this trade-off between some of those other critical transformative projects, the big capacity projects. So I just wanted to put that mention in on the Caltrans projects, critical partner. We can't do it all. We're trying to do what we can to advance those projects, so we're also competitive again for those state and federal dollars.
Thank you, James, for that clarification. I too was asked about why Caltrans was involved in this round as well. I think this just really emphasizes the need to have a broader understanding or better understanding of the analysis that you and your staff are undertaking when you go through these funding rounds. And if nothing else, we will all benefit it to be able to fine tune, our applications in the future. And so obviously the individual meetings with the agencies is necessary to get more into the details. But I think, bringing it back to the full board and having a presentation, maybe if jurisdictions are willing, let them be used as examples as what to do, what not to do, what could have been done better, that was right on the edge, and then getting a broader perspective of what, you guys your staff are facing. That I think that'll help all of us as we go back and look at our projects, and then gives us a greater sense of what you're dealing with at the regional level, of what we collectively, being members of this agency, should be dealing with at the regional level. So I want to take it to our public audience, because I know there's been a hand up for a while out here. I think it was Mr. John Merchant. Is that correct? And Mr. Merchant's on mute.
Yeah, am I unmuted now?
Yeah, you're unmuted. Yep, go ahead.
Thank you. I first of all wanted to thank you for number one, allowing us to participate in this process, and number two, for selecting us. Our community was involved in the advocacy for the Scott Road realignment. And I'd like to talk for a minute about your maintenance and modernization category, because quite honestly, I think what we've learned from this process, and I think is valuable information for you, is communities like ours in these competitions now have a chance. I mean, I thank you to Mr. Corliss for explaining the role of Caltrans in this process, but it's very difficult for the Scott Road to compete with the Hazel interchange on Highway 50. It was terrific that you were able to select almost all of these projects. The other part of this, I think that's valuable for you is that you now have about 7,000 or 8,000 people who at least know who you are. We had no idea when we got into this process. We were very fortunate that the regional connector allowed us to select the project as a priority and got cooperation from Folsom as well, because this is a mutual benefit to both of us. We approached it as a safety issue. We've been trying to get this road fixed for 30 years. We now have 750,000 trips a year on a rural road that can no longer efficiently handle our cattle and horse trailers. We frankly thought we had absolutely zero chance of doing this, but we thought we would give it a go. And we had a tremendous response back to our public input from the organization. When they got a letter from one of our residents, they acknowledged that this doesn't always happen when you're engaged in this type of process. So I wanted to thank you. And if there's anything that we could do to help the process along in the future, I mean, we were able, this is a motherhood issue for us. We were able to engage virtually an entire community around getting this project approved. And it's important, I think, that going forward, if you can continue to demonstrate these kind of results, that some of these smaller communities like ours really understand that, yeah, you really do have a chance. So thank you again for the work that you did for us. You're the front page in our local newspaper, so thanks a lot.
Thank you, Thank you, Mr. Merchant. Appreciate your comment and engagement. Glad to hear Sacog's on the front page for something good. Sounds like too. That's always good when you're on the front page for that. I'll bring it back to the committee. I know we have a motion from Director Chenier and a second from Director Desmond. Any more comments or questions on this matter before we go to a roll call vote? The directors? Okay, seeing none. Jessica, you want to do a roll call vote, please?
Yes, please prepare to indicate your vote when I call your name. Director Bradford?
Aye.
Branscombe? Absent. Desmond?
Aye.
Ledesma?
Aye.
Jennings?
Aye.
Joyner?
Yes.
Saylor?
Yes.
Chenier? Chenier, can you repeat your vote?
Aye. Aye.
Thank you. Vice Chair Sander?
Aye.
Vice Chair Spokley?
Yes.
And Chair Soon?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Soon you're on mute.
I don't know where I cut out. I just want to thank you, everybody. Again, thanks staff for all the hard work. Moving on to item 7, 2021 Regional Active Transportation Program funding recommendations. Ms. Cacciatore, good morning.
Good morning. I am Victoria Cacciatore of the Sacog staff, and I'm here to present the funding recommendation for the 6-county Regional Active Transportation Program. So the Active Transportation Program is a combination of state and federal funds that is co-implemented by the California Transportation Commission and Caltrans. Sacog, as the Metropolitan Planning Organization for El Dorado, Placer, Yolo, Yuba, Sutter, and Sacramento counties, receives a portion of that funding. That was written into the original law that created the Active Transportation Program in 2013, recognizing that MPOs like Sacog need money to help us implement our MTP SES, so our long-range plan. I'd also like to thank El Dorado County Transportation Commission and Placer County Transportation Planning Agency for working with Sacog to implement this funding program. It takes a lot of staff work from them too, and it is a stronger program for the great insight that they offer into the needs of their counties, in addition to what we know about those needs. So what we have is a very competitive funding program. We had 4 times the amount of funding requests as we had funding available to distribute. And the Active Transportation Program is a an odd duck in a world of funding programs. It is two-tiered, where first projects compete in a statewide competition, and then they have the option to compete at a local or the regional competition through our Regional Active Transportation Program. Sacog worked with EDCTC and PCTPA and also project sponsors to try to figure out the ways that we could make this as streamlined as possible, while still looking for the ways that we can use this funding source to further the goals of our MTP. The funding program at the state was also very competitive. Last month, I shared an update about 4 projects that were recommended for funding from the Sacog region, and those 4 were approved for funding at the end of March, so actually just last week. So that meant that we got to pull those 4 projects from our competition. To do a brief catch up on what was approved in the Sacog policy framework for how we conduct the regional ATP, we had many of the same areas as what the state emphasizes, where there's a very important discussion of safety, that there is a focused discussion on how the project will increase biking and walking, how it serves important community destinations, and to some level, the balance of what the cost of the project is and also the promise it holds for that area to increase biking and walking. It's not so much just a story of cost effectiveness, because sometimes the most cost effective treatment is not going to be serving that community or the users well. Acknowledging that if you have a 45-mile-per-hour road and you're looking for a way to get middle school students there, that, say, in a class 2 bike lane, while cost effective, may not be the appropriate treatment for those middle school students. So other parts of our regional ATP policy framework that went into forming this program, we had a funding requirement of 7% non-ATP funding. This was a one-time decrease from the 11.47% non-ATP funding normally required. The impact of this was that obviously for all of the projects that were requesting regional ATP funding, but only provided that 7% amount, we were not able to fund as many projects. The funding recommendation before you has 6 projects recommended for full funding and 1 project recommended for partial funding. We also, as the MPO, have a question that asks project sponsors to describe how this project is fitting into the community and helping to achieve greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And that is normally framed in terms of how is this working with the land uses of today and the anticipated land uses, people that would be moving into that area, and how is it going to support increased biking and walking between now and the end of our plan. And the last new criteria that was introduced at the regional level that is not included at the state competition is how this supports the economic prosperity or the economic vitality of an area. And with biking and walking focused projects, there are a lot of different shapes that takes. And you can see that through the list of projects recommended, where there are some that are going to create connected networks that will get people to the places that they need to or want to go that are currently impassable because of infrastructure barriers, and others that have been looking more at what does it take to revitalize an area by creating strong connections to, say, a business district. And the last item that was new to our policy framework that differed from the state requirements is that we had the Sacog board identified a goal of investing at least 35% of the funding into projects that provide a meaningful benefit to disadvantaged communities. So with that, I'd like to pause for any questions about the funding program framework that we started with before we get into the full recommendations.
Okay, thank you, Victoria. Any questions from the committee members? Seeing none, proceed, please.
Okay. We had originally 25 projects that were competing for regional ATP funding. Most of those, 21 of them, were carried over from the state competition, though many of the 7 of those elected to reduce their scopes to compete in our smaller funding program. Of all of those projects, we distributed all of those to a multidisciplinary working group that had experience with bike ped planning, land use planning, public health and equity, and greenhouse gas emissions reduction strategies, and very relevant policy experience that you can see outlined in the attachment that shows where the different working group members were from and which agencies they represented. The working group independently reviewed their applications between early January and mid-February. Starting in mid-February, they met remotely to discuss all of the projects, identify the strengths, identify the areas where they had questions for the project sponsors that would help them more accurately score the projects. Sacog staff then sent those questions to the project sponsors so they could provide the feedback and the answers that the working group was looking for. And following receiving those questions, the working group sponsors or the working group members all scored the applications that were competing for funding. From the combined scores, we dropped the high and the low and averaged the rest of them, and then developed a ranked list of the regional ATP funding recommendations. From that, the working group met one last time and discussed all of the projects, the top 9 top scoring projects, and identified how they would prioritize them for funding. And when it came down to the last bit of funding, they deferred the responsibility to finalize the funding recommendation to Sacog, EDCTC, and PCTPA staff. And so the recommendation that you have before you is that recommendation that we were able to receive. The working group identified that they definitely wanted to fund through project scoring 80, and then there was a small amount of money left that they couldn't quite figure out how to assign to a project. And so within Sacog, we combined that funding recommendation and looked at what was also competing in the 4-county regional program that you just took an action on. And we were able to identify the recommended funding list with that you see in attachment A. I'd also like to note that you did receive an updated item, an updated version of attachment A that has what is an unprecedented event with regional ATP, but makes sense when you look at it more. Yolo County was recommended for partial funding and for their Yolo 80 project, and seen that they were able to look at the ranked contingency list, so the projects that are next in line if more funding were to come available. They determined that the optimal use would be if they were to step back from that funding to allow the next project that is a little bit further along in the development, and then that also involves Yolo County as a project partner, for them to step up. There is a lot of great need with the Winters project that is now being included in the draft funding recommendation. It serves the residents of the El Rio Villa housing development, which is in Yolo County, and provides a safer connection for them to get into the town of, or the city of Winters, and all of the services and amenities and just needs that are provided for within the city limits. And with that, the recommendation before you is that the Transportation Commission or Committee recommend that Sacog Board approve by resolution the 6-county regional ATP funding recommendation and contingency list, and also authorize our executive director to develop the transmittal documentation and for staff to develop the required Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program amendments so people could start putting this money to good use.
Great. Thank you, Victoria. Are there any questions from the committee members? All right. Seeing none, oh, I see a question. Okay, Director Saylor, you want to talk about your generosity in Yolo County?
I would like to thank the Sacog team for their flexibility and understanding. This project that is moved up one rank based on Yolo County's stepping aside on the bike connectivity project that we had identified is highly critical, and we are seeking every avenue to support that improved access for pedestrians and bicycle traffic from a low-income housing project that was cut off from the city of Winters about 40 years ago or so by the construction of Interstate 505. So it's a classic environmental justice issue that we have an opportunity to address. Thanks to this modification of the recommendation, we're able to move forward a little bit. And as I said, we know that there are several funding opportunities coming up with the infrastructure focus at the national level. We hope that we're able to work with Caltrans and the city of Winters to advance this project even further. And this adjustment allows us to leverage maybe as much as $10 million in additional funds to complete this project. So I appreciate it, and I appreciate what I hope will be the Transportation Committee's support.
Very admirable gesture, Director Saylor. Thank you. I see no one in I'm going to go to the public. I don't see anyone's requesting to speak. So I'm going to bring it back to our committee members and entertain any motions.
I'll move it. This is Chenier.
Okay, Director.
Second by Sander.
Director, a second by Vice Chair Sander. Roll call vote, please, Jessica.
Yes, absolutely. Director Bradford.
Aye.
Thank you. Branscombe, who is absent. Desmond.
Aye.
Ledesma.
Aye.
Thank you. Jennings.
Aye.
Joyner.
Aye.
Saylor.
Aye.
Chenier.
Aye.
Vice Chair Sander.
Aye.
Vice Chair Spokley.
Yes.
Chair Soon.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Great. Thank you. And now we'll move on to our informational item, air quality conformity update and PM10 budgets. Renee, you know, for folks, if the public, for the public still listening, I mean, this air quality governs us all. And so we talk about funding for transportation, and but a lot of this work or a lot of our efforts are to achieve compliance with air quality requirements. So very germane to this conversation right now. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So pause here for a second. All right, just checking that you're seeing the PowerPoint. Okay.
Yes, we're seeing it. Sorry, I was
Move one slide over and I'm good. Okay. All right, Renee DeVere-Oki. I am part of your planning staff here at Sacog, and I help coordinate all of our regional air quality planning. So this is actually an information item today for this committee. It'll be an action at our Land Use Committee this afternoon. And so the anticipated action will be to support the use of updated vehicle emission budgets in the Sac Metro Air District's maintenance plan for demonstration of the PM10 public health standard through 2033. So to help you understand this a little bit better, I will do a little bit of table setting on the plan that the Air District is developing and our role, and what exactly these budgets are. So I'll start off big picture. So the Environmental Protection Agency sets thresholds or science-based public health standards, which require the state and our local air districts develop plans to take steps to improve air quality locally and to reduce these health impacts. These are part of their Clean Air Act responsibilities. So EPA does this for a variety of criteria pollutants. These are ozone, particulate matter, carbon monoxide. You'll see those on the screen there. So each one of these highlighted or dashed outline geographies on the map has a designation that goes with it, with the non-attainment or maintenance. And so this attribute determines the type of air quality plan or the demonstration that the local air district and state must develop. And it has different timing, different 8-hour versus 24 hours that goes along with it. So as you can see, our local 5 air districts are involved in a variety of different ways. So 6 counties, 5 air districts. But the criteria pollutant that we're going to be talking about today here is PM10. And you'll see that that geography is actually specific to Sacramento County. So just as a bit of background, particulate matter is a form of pollution that comes from sources such as construction sites, paved roads, fields, smokestacks, fires. It also forms up in the atmosphere as a result of complex chemical reactions. So sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide mixes it. And those come from industries and our power plants. So particulate matter comes in 2 different sizes, 10 and 2.5. And that's where we come up with PM10 or PM2.5. It stands for micrometers, which is basically these really small incremental measures of pollution. So high level exposures can cause health impacts such as decreased heart and lung function. So that's why we care about these particular items. And one of the things you might ask is how come it's specific just to the Sacramento County air boundary? And that's actually a relic of the attainment or an EPA designated back in the 1990s. So 2.5 is actually broader around the 6 county region. And that just is because EPA in the 2000s changed how they went about going through the designation process. So to jump in a little bit, so back in 2012, the Sac Metro Air District acted on an implementation maintenance plan and redesignation requests, which demonstrated that the county could meet the public health standard for PM10 and for a 10-year period. The action was in 2013, so that demonstration period was 2013 through 2023. And so obviously we're approaching 2023, so the Air District needs to do this for another 10 years. And so the document that they are developing is called a second maintenance plan. So it's kind of a little bit of a good news scenario. So when we hit 2033, that means we actually demonstrated for 20 years that we are doing what we need to do to attain the standard. And so we become an attainment zone for particulate matter. So as part of a second maintenance plan, you have to go through and document how all the sources collectively do not exceed the health standards. So the Air District works with the California Air Resources Board, or CARB, to develop emission calculation methodologies for what you're seeing there. Off-road mobile sources, area-wide sources, stationary, and then on-road mobile sources, which is mostly us. And so the Air District works with Sacog and with CARB to help develop these vehicle emission budgets. So budget development actually doesn't happen that frequently. I think the last time I came here to speak regarding budgets was probably about 4 years ago. Process-wise, where do these come from? So CARB utilizes our Sacog vehicle data. So VMT, also our lane miles. In this case, our data came from the 2020 MTPSES that we adopted back in November of 2019. And then CARB uses their own emission model to develop estimates that go along with
One
this.
of my ideas is to potentially flex.
Hold on, Matt, I can hear you.
Matt, you're on. Yeah, there you go.
So let's see. So CARB sends them back over to us. And so once it arrives on kind of in our hands, so the Sac Metro Air District staff actually checks to make sure it fits in with all those other sources you saw on the prior screen. We, as your staff, look to see how it's going to fit into our MTIP development processes and our future MTPSES to make sure that we can utilize these budgets and they're okay. And one thing that's unique to something like this is we take it to what we call our Sacog Regional Planning Partnership, which is our interagency consultation body where we bring all the air districts or federal partners together to discuss technical air quality issues. And so that group met last week and moved these budgets forward. And so one of the things when I say our processes, some of you are familiar with the term conformity, which is in the title of the item. And so you can think about that in connection with our MTIP adoption that happened earlier this year. Just quickly, a conformity demonstration is analysis that checks anticipated transportation emissions at various points in our MTPSES life cycle. And then the finding of conformity means that changes in the proposed transportation network actually don't impede our ability to meet health standards. So vehicle emission budgets developed here will be used in future conformity demonstrations. And the budgets that were just developed were for years 24, 27, and 33. I'm going to pause quickly on this really detailed screen, but this is what's in your attachment A. And I will jump to the next one, which kind of just simplifies it. So as I said, 24, 27, 33 are our budget years. And the numbers that you actually just want to pay attention to in looking at the attachment are the bottom line numbers that are listed here. So you'll notice that we've got PM10 budgets and NOx budgets. NOx obviously goes down over time, and that's as a result of engines becoming a little bit cleaner. And then PM10, you'll notice that kind of goes up, and that's related kind of to growth and economic growth and development. So next steps are after we take action on these here today and move it to our board, the Sac Metro Air District will fold these into their plan and send that out for public review and adoption. And then once they've acted on that, it'll go to CARB and then it will go to EPA. All this will take quite a bit of time. And the first time you'll probably see us using these budgets would actually be in 2024, 23 as we do the next MTPSES. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions that you have. I also have David Yang from the Air District here if you have any questions on that side of the aisle. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. Are there any questions from our committee members? I have a quick question. As you establish these budgets, are they influenced at all by our new normal, if you will, with the teleworking and such? Would those do anything to affect budgets, how we consider them?
So the data that we used was actually from the 2020 MPP, so it had to be from 2019. And one of kind of the interesting things is we have to line up all the same level of data across sectors. And so on the Air District side, their data is also from 2019. So I guess you would say, yes, this is pre-pandemic, pre-new normal. As we move forward, I think something like that will probably pop up when we're revisiting our ozone plan or our PM 2.5 plans. What's interesting about air quality is it's like a slow train. It gets set in the past and then you keep moving forward and you have budgets that stay with you for a while.
So there is a deliberative process, I guess. So if we determine that for whatever reason, maybe these budgets should be changed now that we have new data, new work habits, new transportation travel habits, that it would be, we would have that ability to change it during these next few years.
I would say what's interesting about it is when we do our next plan, and if we're observing changes in travel behavior, those inputs would then go into the model that determines this and gets compared. So our budget probably would, if we're driving less in the future, these budgets might look a little bit higher. So we'd pass by more
Right.
from a conformity standpoint, just for this particular pollutant.
Okay. Thank you. I don't see any questions from the members. I don't see any questions from the public. Jessica, am I missing anything?
No public comment.
Okay, thank you. Bringing it back, this is an informational item. So with that, if there's no questions for Renee or David, I just want to thank you both for your presentation and time today.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, with that, on to other matters. I don't have anything under that item.
Chair Soon just might want to just extend an invitation or remind everybody there's an exciting opportunity to join us over beginning at noon. Victoria Cacciatore, our program manager, will be talking about the Park and Trail Strategic Plan. And so some good developments there. And so please join us if you can. It will start at 12 noon.
Great. Thank you very much, Matt. Okay. If there's
if we want you to join us, whether you can or perhaps if you can't. This is the month here in April that we're really trying to get the word out on the Parks and Trails Plan. You'll hear more again from Victoria, as Matt just said, over the lunchtime. But we have, you'll have an email from me that has things to put in newsletters. We have an open public engagement tool out there right now called Maptionaire through the end of April. Please help us get the word out. This is a great engagement opportunity. Kudos to Director Joyner and Lincoln. I believe the city of Lincoln put this on their website, and we now have all these responses from Lincoln on this. So we're trying to get a little friendly competition going here. So thanks again for Lincoln. And so if you can join us for that would be great. Again, we've got the month of April to work on this. I do want to just again, thank the staff here at Sacog. The two big items you heard, the funding round item, the ATP item, that's a ton of work that goes in. We're not done yet, but this is a big stopping point. And I just want to give a lot of credit to our staff. Matt Carpenter, as you know, who is transitioning out and sadly leaving us at the end of June. Garrett, who put a ton of work in, and Victoria. Sometimes you take the ATP item after this and there wasn't a lot of discussion on it, but a lot of work goes into that. And I firmly believe that is all about actually making our member jurisdictions, our partners better, putting forward better projects, more competitive projects. And so again, just want to give a big thank you to all the work that went into a lot of those recommendations that were in front of you this morning, and a lot of the board's engagement from last summer forward. So hope to see you over the lunch hour. Thanks again to the rest of the Sacog staff, and we'll see you soon.
James, thank you very much. It can't be said enough. I think all the committee members and the board members greatly appreciate the staff's work on this. And Matt, what a great way to cap off, your career by handing out a couple $100 million.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your work on this. I hope to see you all at noon. Thanks, everybody. Take care. All right, meeting adjourned.
Thanks.